Blue Archive. For many individuals who've been a long time fan of this channel, you know that I started with this game, I continuously play it, and in the Discord server, it's a relatively active channel, or category I suppose. And as a result, I have a lot of thoughts in the game. I played it the longest outside of Genshin Impact, and ultimately I still adore the characters, I still love the characterization, I still love the relationship storylines. Izuna is still one of my favorite characters. However, this does not mean that I will ignore the flaws the game has, or try to hide them, because I play the game here and there. I love the characters, but the gameplay aspect and a lot more of the mechanics to delve into it do kind of irk me here and there. So I'm going to talk about that. Now, I won't be delving into the gacha side of things because, as I mentioned previously, gacha can really depend inherently on how lucky you are. You may think the gacha system is great in a lot of games because you're really lucky. And you may think the opposite if you're really unlucky. So I won't delve into that. Instead, I want to delve into a bigger problem on the actual game itself. So if you're interested, stick around, subscribe to the channel if you found this video helpful, and let's move on. Now, Blue Archive has a lot going for it. The characters are really nice, they're nicely designed, but depending on who you are, they can feel like reskins of one other character. They can do not or really particularly average things. By this I mean one character may have a very similar skill set or very similar feeling to another unit, and as such, depending on who you are, you may not notice a difference. I'm not a meta slave, I will never be a meta slave, so if you are a meta slave, cool, whatever. But I think one of the bigger issues is Blue Archive, and this is something I mentioned previously in my Arknights video, Blue Archive doesn't necessarily do a really good job of explaining the mechanics to you. Now, don't get me wrong, the game mentions them to you, but mentioning them and getting them across as a player are two totally different things. I think Blue Archive has a really nice gameplay loop. I think it's a very fun game depending on who you are, and I think there's a lot you can improve on. I mean, in terms of player skill and player knowledge. But I don't think a vast majority of the player base knows a lot of the game's internal mechanics. And I think that does come down to with the fact that the early stages of the game are really easy, and this is something that Arknights does, but Arknights does it better. The early stages of the game are pretty easy, and as such, they don't require you to really worry too much about your team composition, what units are good in what environments, who does what, enemy resistances and weaknesses, and as such, you can kind of brute force it in a lot of ways. Because you'll be leveling up so quickly in the early stages of the game, you can really outscale the content if you just continue to farm for materials. And the game gives you so much stamina because you're doing a lot of different tasks, you're achieving a lot of different things, you have the cafe and so on, that you really can do that really easily. And with Arknights, the case is that even though you outscale the game in terms of difficulty depending on the unit that you have, the game itself does have dedicated tutorials where it locks off other units, gives you a certain set of units, and tells you beat the stage. And each of those tutorials does teach you certain things, and if they don't teach you certain things, they lock you off to a certain set of units that you have to worry a bit more about positioning and strategy. You have to consider the radius of your units, whether the healer is going to heal this person, how good is their healing comparatively to other units. And you also have to worry about the enemies you're facing off against. Is there going to be a large pack swarming you in one area? If that's the case, you may want to put a guard down and a defender. Alternatively, a vanguard could supply and suffice just fine. And as a result of that, I think Arknights does a lot better job of teaching you the mechanics of the game and teaching you about how to play certain units and how to care about certain things like the radius of units, like the skills and abilities, like the block count and the damage certain units can deal, compared to Blue Archive. Because you don't actively have control over Blue Archive's characters, you're left a lot to determine the skills. But the game, and I really think this could be a problem depending on the stat system too, but there are different stats that units can give, such as crowd control, have crits, and there are a bunch of different stats that you have. Obviously there's HP and defense, which are basic in most standard games. But outside of the basic mechanics, you don't necessarily know how a lot of these come into play. And this does, to a degree, affect Total Assault. If you're not brute forcing Total Assault and actually paying attention to the mechanics, then you end up in a situation in which Total Assault can be a very difficult thing for you because you either don't know what the abilities of your units do, or you don't know how to properly manage your team to get them to do certain things you want. For instance, you have the front, back, and middle placement in which units will arrange themselves in that order. And let's be honest here, sometimes it doesn't make sense. Why is Izuna in the front? Why? I still don't understand it, but you know what, whatever. She's a frontline unit somehow, and a lot of times she drags aggro away from my Tsubaki, but I don't care, whatever, cool. Even if you're ignoring that, the environment system can be a bit iffy. If you don't understand it fully, you're just going to end up placing down units that you know are strong because the enemy is weak against them and not because they're really good in the environment, even if that can play a pretty big role. Add that on top of the fact that you may not properly understand the skills and abilities of your unit to the point where you're building them up and you're increasing their star ranking and gaining new abilities and subsequently increasing their stats, but you don't know what is happening. That can dramatically change the difficulty that you're having. And if you're going to say, oh, it's a problem with the player, or it's a skill issue, that doesn't necessarily change the fact that it's not properly or adequately brought to the attention of the player or taught to them. Mentioning something and teaching the player something are entirely different things. Arknights will teach you about the combat systems, and then there's a lot more you can discover yourself. It doesn't mention the different branches, but it does teach you what a guard does. And I'd much rather a game teach me than hope and pray that I figure it out later on. Telling me, oh hey, enemies and characters that you have operate differently in different environments is an entirely separate thing than showing me the different environments and telling me, oh hey, this is how you can tell what environment this is. Or actively telling me how heavily this is going to impact my team composition. Or even explaining the stats-based systems. Even the artifacts, or essentially the equipment that you're giving them, I say artifacts because Genshin Impact, give different stats, and the specials or the individuals who aren't necessarily on field do assist your teammates, whether that be by giving them crit or by boosting their healing. It doesn't matter. The stats themselves that they give you aren't really explained to you, and I'm not saying a game should go down a list of all 70 different stats and adequately and properly explain each and every one of them to you. But the stat system in of itself isn't adequately or in any sense, I think, mentioned or even hinted at. You have crowd control power. You have crit resistance. Then you have crit damage resistance. You obviously have the healing section. You also have the max HP recovery. You have attack and attack speed. And all of these, to a degree, are self-explanatory. Just like the accuracy and evasion statistics. It's why units with higher evasion are a lot better because they can survive for longer. They have a degree of survivability. Then you also have recovery boost, you have cost recovery, you then have stun. And there are different stats that affect different characters and different units, and different units can give different stats, and I like that because it does allow you to a degree to build out certain units. But it's very difficult for a lot of individuals to understand why a certain unit is really good if they don't understand what they even do. A lot of individuals look at EX skills and say this is nice, but if you don't understand what the other skills, the basic, the enhanced, and the sub skills actually do, it's very difficult to understand why a unit is really valuable to you in the first place, outside of just looking cute. And even if we're looking at the detailed student info, sure, it gives you different stats like crowd control power, the cost recovery, the power of different sections, street, indoor, and outdoor. You have crowd control resistance, you have the range of their attacks and the stability. And you have different things, healing, accuracy, crit damage, defense, and attack. All of these things matter. But the issue is, none of these stats have a realistic way for you to individually look at and say, oh, what does defense do? Oh, what does accuracy do? Because it's not available in game. I'm not saying the game needs to explain it, but I'm saying there's no system for you to check in game easily. And while there is a certain little tab in the student section that gives an FAQ on everything involving the student, a lot of individuals aren't going to check there. And a lot of the further mechanics of the game, which you can actually affect in gameplay, don't matter or aren't explained. An example is, I don't think a lot of players have any idea or anything about targeting priority. This, as a result, ends up in you bringing a team where you think or have maybe one or two units who are meant to deal with one specific boss enemy, and as a result of that, they end up targeting everything except that boss. And I understand this can come down to the fact that Blue Archive doesn't manually allow you to control a lot of things, but even still, the fact that a lot of mechanics seem to rely, to a degree at least, on targeting, and you can bring an entire team either dedicated to killing off all the main enemies and just accept that your team may be dealing lower damage to the boss because they're not specifically built and attributed to their weaknesses, or you can try your luck with brute force. You also have certain stages that have environmental damage. An example is one of the events had a fire-based stage where enemies would explode into a ball of flame that left fire on the ground, and you had your team running blindly through it. And this leads into situations where you kind of lose control of your characters because you can't influence what's happening on field, you just have to watch. And I think Blue Archive is a fun game. It is a nice game, but there are slight flaws that do bring down the overall experience and enjoyment factor of the game itself simply due to their inherent existence. So, I want to hear what you have to say. What do you think the biggest problem with Blue Archive is? I just think it's the fact that a lot of the mechanics aren't adequately explained and a lot of people don't know them. I don't want the game to handhold, I want the game to at least give you some inkling of there being a deeper system. Arknights does that better. And I don't like to compare games, but Arknights does that better. But either way, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like on the video, consider subscribing down below, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!